Oh, no, it's fine. Brilliant. Thank you very much for coming. So, my name's Ryan Pullen. I'm Director of Cybersecurity for a Bristol-based MSSP called Stripe IoT. We provide 24/7 cybersecurity services, pen testing, and everything in between. My talk today is a little bit about some of the lessons I've learned, probably the hard way, and trying to dispel some of the myths and some of the rules that I've learned along the way. My career, I've done everything from incident response to pen testing to consultancy, did some pen testing on oil rigs and bumped into various threat actors like Lapsus and Akira and Maze and all sorts of other weird and wonderful people along the way. So this is something that exists in our industry, regretfully, but the stories that I'm going to tell today is obviously going to spare some of the information, but the learning that comes from this is the key point, because I don't think it's things that you can learn from courses and you learn typically by, either being smacked in the face or learning through long nights and making simple mistakes. Okay? And so throughout this talk, I'm probably going to come across things which seem ambiguous, but there will be a point towards the end. Okay? So, my first large incident and what it taught me. Respect begins with remembering names. So when I had my very, very first significant incident, this was a very, very large company, and it was a complete top-down wipeout of their systems ransomware attack. Everything was impacted, right? All of the systems were offline. I was the person that took the very first phone call from the head of security that I was speaking to. Probably about 6 months prior, we were teaching a training course. And something I've learned probably the hard way is the greatest purpose is to serve those that serve others. There's a quote by Simon Sinek. There's a few little Simon Sinek bits throughout this talk. But what that means is, using your skills and using your abilities to try and protect those that probably don't understand, probably shouldn't understand, and try and utilize your skills to benefit them. And so what I learned from my first significant incident was all of the fallout that occurs the hard way. And so my talk is about the infinite game. And I'll talk about the infinite game in a moment. But the hard way was we saw 250 staff come into work the next day and not know what to do. We saw people probably contemplating, where are we going to be in 2 weeks? Am I going to get paid? And those sorts of things. And when you think of cybersecurity or you think of an incident or something like that, it certainly wasn't when this happened, probably 8 or 9 years ago. And for me, it was really seeing that take place quite literally in front of me. And I had to kind of step up and try and make this a good situation for them. There was only a lose-lose situation then. And it was my job and my team's job to try and turn that around. And so my rule number one, respect begins with remembering names, is those people don't know left from right. It's your job to guide them, or it was my job at the time. And it was very, very important a moment for me. I was working with someone who was very, very senior. I looked up to, and they knew who I was. And it was an intangible skill that I learned from that very first moment, was I felt relevant in this space, and it really willed me on to try and do the very best I could to change the situation and to change the narrative that was kind of in front of us. I spent probably 33 days on site, weekends and everything, and we were able to get people back up and working. Now, that wasn't just me, but I was impacted by other people making you feel like you can make a difference here. And so now I'm a director in a company is something that I really, really strive to achieve. So every single new starter in our business, all of the directors meet them, because it's very, very important to understand who's coming, what they're here for, and what the mission statement is. So that's rule number one. Cybersecurity, the infinite game. So Simon Sinek has a book called The Infinite Game, and in game theory there are finite games and there are infinite games. For example, football is a finite game. There's known teams, so you've got Manchester United versus Manchester City, for example. You know the rules, you know there's a time limit, you know the objective is to score the most goals and come out a winner, for example. And then there's infinite games, which there is no defined objective, there is no defined goal, You don't know who all of the teams are. You might know who some of them are. For example, I mentioned some threat actors a moment ago, and they're, kind of their brand names. But also they have affiliate programs. So you don't know everybody behind the scenes. And this is something that I learned because I was quite goal-orientated. So when I started working in offensive security and doing penetration tests, it was quite literally a finite game. You get the scope, you do the rules of engagement and everything in between, and then you deliver the report, and that's the end of the engagement. But more recently, my career has turned to continuous operations, security operations, and keeping people safe. And there is a true definitive reason why that is an infinite game. And it's because when there's a cyber incident, other stuff's still happening in other places. You can't just turn that off. And so rule number 2 is to save phone numbers a lifeline in unexpected moments. Because for me, being able to phone the right people you need when you need to bring more players into the game because you don't know who you're up against is really, really important. And there was a specific moment on the incident that I mentioned previously, and it was around ransom negotiations. And it just so happened that I had met someone from the National Crime Agency a few years prior, and I was able to phone them up. And they were able to come in and support the narrative for that cause. Now, that might seem insignificant, but during that moment and that chaos, having somebody else come in and reassure from an authoritarian perspective, and someone that probably does this on a regular basis, really, really provided that gravitas. And so every single person that I meet, that I engage with, I save their phone number because you don't know when you might need it. So a little bit of an image to define kind of finite and infinite games. This really shows the differences, and I didn't come up with this theory, this is Simon Sinek and his book, but when you relate it to cybersecurity, you can really understand. And this is something that I pose to people during interviews, because lots of people are goal-orientated, and that's absolutely fine. And some people are happy for that larger ethic or that undertone to be the reason and their cause for being able to push through this career. And so everybody that works in our security operations practice aligns more to the goals of an infinite game and being able to support and being able to drive that narrative. For example, one of our clients is an NHS trust. And so one of the questions I ask in an interview is, what motivates you and some of those things. And there's a common trend, which is, borderline helper complex, wanting to be able to support other people, which gives them their fulfillment, right? That's a commonality with lots of different people. But when you can take a very technical, complex, high-pressure environment skill and understand that tomorrow is not going to be any easier, it really drives that ability for sustainability. We hear about turnout and we hear about turnover and burnout, in security operations and cybersecurity, and it being quite vast in some roles. This is something that I've tried to utilize to understand if people are doing it for the right reasons, if it's their first role. Because realistically speaking, you don't want to be caught in that situation. You don't want to be on a night shift by yourself and, kind of in yourself is not right. You don't want to go down that path. And so what I try to do is guide people from that perspective. And that's why my talk around the infinite game really represents some of those hard times, and it's when you're in that more extreme circumstance, if you like. And so I kind of learned this the hard way because of incidents that I was kind of put into. I didn't have a defined role a few years ago, and I was involved in a bit of everything. And when I found that I was able to really influence these people's situations and make situations better for them, it really gave me that boost in fulfillment. And that's not to say you can't in other areas like GRC and penetration testing and open source intelligence. They all play their place. They all play their role. But for me, it was really the investigations and finding out what had happened, when it had happened, and giving them the confidence that the same situation is unlikely to happen again. Never say never in this game, obviously, but it was unlikely. And so my third role is be end of day, not end of week. The reason being is if you're end of day and not end of week, you're probably 7 times quicker, right? And so if you can speak to the client or speak to the person in trouble or speak to the issue that is occurring, at the end of each day, they come in the next day reassured. If you don't do that, and this goes for all situations in my life, whether that's a team member going through difficulty at home, whether that's, sustainable development or whatever it is, I try and apply end of day, not end of week. Now, that's not always practical because you need more time to be able to give people a tangible update. But them knowing that that process is underway is really, really key. And I learned this the hard way because there was an incident occurring and I was the person that was kind of principally investigating it. And it was my job to provide updates to the board. And it was felt that it was kind of out of control because they didn't know what was happening. And it was because, data was parsing and whatever else, perfectly reasonable reason from a technical perspective. But what they were trying to understand was, is finance going to be a backup and running? Do we need to start letting people go? And so I then made sure every single day I gave an end of day update so they understood exactly where we were at to inform their next day decisions. So, human behaviors and emotional intelligence. In cybersecurity, this is challenging because you're coming at it from lots and lots of different perspectives, lots of different goals as well. So lots of people are fighting for availability, some people are fighting for confidentiality and integrity, etc. And so the aggregation of marginal gains and 1 degree of change is kind of famously published by Dave Brailsford, who was a performance cycling coach for Sky. And he took our cycling team to all sorts of wonderful successes because he looked at small intangible differences that when you extrapolate over a longer term made a huge impact. For example, one of the things Dave did was every hotel the team slept in on their tour or on their training programs when they're going through the mountains in France, etc., was he made a team designed to take mattresses out of those beds and put the right mattress in the beds. So their body composition didn't change. And when you don't change your body composition and you're a performance athlete, that 1% makes a huge difference over time. And they didn't look at time, they looked at throughput. So they looked at the amount of energy that they would expel, and they knew if they kept up to 400 repetitions, they would beat everybody, because no one else was training to do that. And then there's aerodynamics and everything else in between. What does this mean in cybersecurity? This means don't just look at the big goal. Break it down into small pieces. And sometimes if you look at a significant incident like a ransomware attack, it can be quite overwhelming. And it's your job sometimes to see the wood from the trees and provide guidance to this organization that, okay, there is tangible steps, there is a next step, here's what we can do. And if you do that and you look to improve 1% each day or 1 degree of change, if you start on the same parallel lines and you change by 1 degree, where you end up in the end is really, really quite different. And so that incremental difference is really, really key. And so that's not trying to solve everything in a week. That's trying to solve things over a longer period of time, like a year. Okay? And for me, when you try and build a team that's focused on that, and you give people the time and the creativity, some of the changes and what comes out of it is way, way, way better than you could have ever, stipulated. If people who are empowered to create that change, it can be really transformational on the return side. Remote working has changed the way we collaborate quite significantly, and I'm sure most of us here probably work from home to some extent, or in some capacities. And the reason why I felt to put this on the slide here and align it to the infinite game is lots of teams don't meet each other anymore, and it's difficult to build those relationships, and especially when you're put in pressured situations. So, for example, you've got a deadline, or you're working on something collaborative. Now, Teams and Zoom and all of those sorts of services are great, but being able to build those interpersonal connections has really, really transformed the way I think difficult challenges represent. And so what I try to do is be available. Be available and be present where you can. And so if you're on a client site and you're able to shake people's hands, it builds trust and it builds confidence that you've got the problem and you've got the solution. Couple that with the other rules so far, you're moving in the right bounds. You're able to be available, you're able to contact people, and you're able to represent, the challenge and the goal that is at hand. Now, this is the biggest one when it comes to emotional intelligence. Now, people are going to make mistakes. We've all made mistakes. Well, I believe we probably all have, whether you like it or not. And for me, it's understanding, okay, what do we do when that thing goes wrong? What does that thing represent when that thing goes wrong? Because I think Elon Musk said this once, and, put your political views to a side. He says, if I give people the opportunity to be able to create, they're going to be able to create the solution for the challenges that they are seeing, which I am probably not. And so being able to have the flexibility and the foresight to be able to improve those things will have compounding effects. Now, I've got a young son, and I had 4 weeks paternity leave. By removing me out of the way and letting people just get on with stuff, because where people would have invited me to a meeting, or I would have thought about it from a different perspective, some of the most transformational changes in my practice occurred. Because people took it upon themselves and put the backpack on, if you like, and started leading. And so, if you're in a position of influence, maybe try that. Maybe try a hackathon. Maybe try giving people the opportunity to be able to have that creative flair where they know they can't fail. So there's a lovely quote. I can't remember who said it, but they said, "How big would you dream if you knew you couldn't fail?" Now, that's quite profound and that's quite inspirational, etc. But realistically, if you're a leader in a business or if you're a new employee and you think like that, and you're able to think, over the boundaries and over the barriers, you can really, really have small tangible impact that extrapolates on a bigger scale, which is your one degree of change. And so my rule number 4 is master the present and control what you can. Try not to worry about what you can't control, because worrying about every threat actor or this isn't quite good enough isn't probably going to do you too many favors over the long term. But if you focus on incremental changes on a consistent basis, where you start by day 1 and where you start by day 365 will be a very, very different place. This is probably one of my favorite quotes. Comparison is the thief of joy. Has everybody been in a situation where you feel like you don't belong, or you're not good enough, or you're insignificant, etc., right? Now, this isn't weird. Everybody has this. In some regard, whether you're at the shops, whether you're in a career, whether you're just doing a hobby, you're doing a hobby for the first time and you're feeling that like kind of social anxiety and everything else in between. That's something that exists for everybody in different capacities, okay? And so, for me, in cybersecurity, there's this big bravado, you've got these big figureheads, and there's this, this hack happened over here, and this company's been hit, and everybody's saying their piece and saying this, you should have bought this silver bullet product, you should have done this, you should have done that. Now, everybody's dealing with the same information, okay? They're dealing with the same information, and they're looking at it from the same perspective, because they probably don't have any information more than you. And so, if imposter syndrome is something that impacts you, focus on the 1 degree of change. Because if you're playing an infinite game, everybody's playing the same game. Everybody's playing with the same amount of fitness, everybody's playing with the same amount of stamina, and everyone's playing with the same amount of time. And so imposter syndrome can be your biggest enemy. Feeling like you don't belong, when actually, you might be the person that the next person is suffering as well, but they just don't show it. And so when you combine forces and you can work as a team, you can make huge impacts. Which brings me to my 5th rule. Look at that transition. I was doing that last night. First impressions shape lasting perceptions. Okay? So if you go in feeling, this imposter syndrome and you don't belong and you're not significant and you shouldn't be there, that person in rule number 1 that remembered my name completely changed that for me in an instant. Completely. And I was able to focus on what I was doing, not am I doing something wrong because there's this person with 15 years more experience. Now, that person probably does know more than me. But it's not going to be so much so that I'm not able to do what I need to do and help them achieve what they need to do. And so first impressions shaping lasting perceptions is something that I really try and fortify. Strong handshake for me is something that I always try and represent. And for me, that's because I want to be there. I want to be present. I want to be in the room. I want to control what I can, which is the last rule. And I want to focus on what am I there to achieve and, move my phone away. And I don't want to have those distractions because, for example, if that's a team one-to-one, I want to give them the time and attention to represent what their challenge is and see it from their perspective and listen and help. If it's a customer, I want to give them the time and attention to be able to represent the challenge. And it might be something that I have no idea how to fix. But that's when you take it to the team for assistance. Or that's when you start going, look, I've not fixed this problem before. I've not been in this situation. And I'm going to try and appropriately, amend, the issues, etc. And take that feedback on. Which comes down to performance versus trust. Now, this is another Simon Sinek thing. I really need to come up with my own, but it really encapsulates the values and the reasoning why the infinite game is really, really important to me. And so I focus on enabling trust and enabling honesty. Everyone starts with that. I'm reasonably unforgiving when people lie or deceit or try to manipulate things, right? And so Simon Sinek talks about high performers and high trust. And this is a relative scale, and he talks about this in a much more eloquent way, but what this represents in cybersecurity is you're only as good as the information you have, and you only are as good as the information that is communicated to you. And that's something that's really difficult in this industry because things move so quickly. And because things move so quickly, you can't communicate all the time, and so you need to be quite succinct. And so when I'm hiring, I don't hire based on necessarily skills unless it's for a specific task, right? And it's probably a short-term challenge and I need that skill and I need it now. I look to build high trust in my teams because I believe you can learn skills, and I think I can build an environment where you're able to learn skills from other like-minded people. And when you put two people on a task and you're working together and you've got a paddle buddy, you're able to take that challenge on together. And so what Simon talks about is everybody wants the high performer of high trust, right? So they've got the skills and everybody loves them and everybody trusts them. Now, a medium performer of high trust might be someone who's newer to the industry, but they're always going to tell you what mistake they've made. They're always going to tell you what pitfalls they have, and you are able to make confident decisions based on what they can do confidently and what they can't. Now, a low performer of high trust might be a new person into the team, or if they're picking up a new skill, right? Now, where you don't want to lean, or from my perspective at least, is anywhere towards the low trust spectrum, because they might be fantastic at their job, but other people are probably going to suffer. And so if you're playing an infinite game in particular, where there is no end, and you've just solved that incident, and you've just solved that problem, and you know next day's going to be different, and Monday's coming around the corner, and you've got to turn up, you want a team who trust each other, and see each other as a unit, and it's not an individual's effort, it's the team collective goal. Now all of that sounds all high and mighty, but I think when you corroborate that into a long-term pathway, you might have superstars in your team, but the real difference maker, and this is something that I really celebrate in my teams, is when there's an incident, right? And you need out-of-hours escalation support and you bring in somebody else in, and they don't say, what's happened, let me get involved. They take on all of the other stuff that no one wants to do. That's high trust, because that's the understanding the goal, that's understanding the team, and that's understanding the challenge at hand. Whoa, that was a crazy one. So rule 6, always be honest, always have a plan, and always expect adversity. So, the ideal team player. When hiring, so everyone can write a CV, ChatGPT, great, everyone sounds lovely and eloquent, great, grammar is no longer a thing, ooh, big deal. This is what I focus on. Great book by Patrick Lencioni, it's called. The Ideal Team Player, and how you try and find the intricacies from each of those individuals and what it makes to build a team player. Now, this rule is no surprises, but be the teammate you always wanted. Because when that person turns up and you really need that troublesome help, And they're able to, even if they can't fix that issue, but they can take some of the stuff off. Like whether that's like super small things, like go and get food or order you a pizza or whatever. Small things that you don't need to do. It really just gives you that morale boost in those times of difficulty. Everything I'm talking about is the things that you can't learn on a course, in my opinion. These are things that I learned the hard way. And I've focused on this for probably 2.5 years. And my team has exceptional tenure in high pressure circumstances. And it's because that's what we look at and that's what we reward. Now, everybody has their own attributes and everyone has their own skill sets and disciplines. But what we look at is the team goal. Things that every single individual needs to look at. Every single individual needs to pull their weight. And for me, that's such a key principle when building a team, is to look at how they're going to integrate and the interoperability. So this is all a bit management-y paragraph and pyramids and all this sort of stuff. But what this is actually focusing on is what's in green. So self-actualization is the real epitome of everybody's fulfillment. And this is Maslow's principles and hierarchy of needs. And self-actualization is, you're very happy, you're fulfilled, you can earn enough money, your home life's good, you've got enough work-life balance, and you're able to do what you need to do out of work to fulfill what's inside of work, is the principle. Now, my favorite bit of all of this is understanding that you don't need to have all of the answers. You don't need to have all of the fixes for everything, but when you bring the right pieces together and you can work collaboratively, you can really have a profound impact. And so the Navy SEALs have this rule, the 1 is 0 and 2 is 1. You're not allowed to do anything by yourself. Okay? Now, in business land, that's not very efficient, it's not very practical, but when you're facing a problem and you're not able to overcome that problem, asking somebody else who doesn't have all of the information that's coming from a completely different perspective might just be that person that gives you that light bulb moment. It's happened time and time against me. Always happens when I'm walking the dogs, right? And so I had 2 people leave. This is quite a few years ago, but 2 quite high influential people in my team leave at the same time. Nothing to do with the business, not just personal circumstances, because they had a better opportunity and they were able to do weird and wonderful things that was their passion. Huge respect for that. And so in myself, I didn't know how to fix this challenge, right? And it was only me. I knew what we needed. And I kind of really self-imposed that pressure. And so I worked all weekend trying to figure out the challenge. And this isn't associated with the self-actualization thing, but the 1 is 0 and 2 is 1. I asked one of my colleagues what approach we should take. And effectively, we just went on offense and we went and found what we wanted and we thought about different tooling and we thought about different personnel and we thought about, okay, can we build up from within? And that one moment was all that it kind of took to really emphasize and influence for the larger goal. And so the rule is the 1 is 0 and 2 is 1 rule, for me, really represents the be curious, not judgmental, which is a quote from Ted Lasso, which is a quote from an American poet. And for me, what that means is don't judge things at face value. Try and be curious. Try and understand the challenge. Try and understand the situation, because by asking the right questions and being specific when you ask questions can make much easier when you come to the actual outcome and the goal. And when you segment it and you implement the 1% rule and you're trying to improve over time, things can become a lot more segmented and a lot easier to digest. So, you don't have to have all the answers. I think I've done. Yeah, I have. So, this is from a book called Radical Candor. I learned a lot from books. I only started reading properly, a few years ago. And I've learned tremendous amounts about, kind of my inefficiencies and things that I probably would have seen the challenges differently. I'm going to put them all up here. And the rule as well. So rule 9, approach with purpose, question with precision. I touched on that on the last one. So radical candor is the principle of making sure that you are driving the end goal for everybody's needs. And so be open, honest, and direct in feedback. Don't pull the punches, but you don't have to be disrespectful. Right? So you can ask for help, and if people are slacking, You can say, you're better than that. I really need you in this moment. And then people might go, oh, right, okay, yeah. Or they might divulge, other challenges that they might be facing, sorry. Listen actively, actually listen and digest what they're saying. Don't interrupt, don't provide solutions, just understand their perspective. Don't try and fix the problem. Simon Sinek calls this sitting in the mud. I don't really get that, but avoid ruinous empathy. So don't withhold back feedback and to spare the feelings. So people sometimes need the hard truth. They need the challenge to be able to improve themselves. I think we probably all know someone that probably could do better if they've just told you really need to tighten these bolts up, you need to go that extra mile, or you can achieve more if you want it, but they probably haven't seen that, or they're self-deprecating, they're having imposter syndrome, or they're not seeing what you are. Challenge directly and caring personally is balancing honesty with empathy. So that's just the real synopsis. I really recommend you read the book. It's changed the way that I approach the challenging situations when you are looking at something quite binary, and there's probably more context to the situation. Now, how does this all tie into the infinite game? If you approach situations with some of these rules and some of these approaches, it can really change the perspective on how you face the challenge. And that challenge, sometimes will be significant. It might be for yourself. It might be, how does someone, progress in their career? It doesn't really matter. It might be, how do I achieve, my first job in cybersecurity, for example? Asking questions with purpose and being concise to make sure you get the right answers is something that I've learned the hard way. Everybody's had an email where they've written a question and the person's just completely ignored it, or they've answered something different from a different context. Be precise if you can. Think about, from a different perspective, if you don't have all the information, how you would answer it. Coming to the end now. So, my 10 rules. I've only shown you 9. My 10th rule is operate with integrity and never give up. So, this all sounds, high and mighty and quite leadership driven and focused from that perspective. But if you are a player that is driving an infinite game, you can't give up, because the team needs you. There's goals at foot. If it's not right, that's not giving up. That's changing game, right? And so operate with integrity is because everybody needs you to play your part and play your piece of the puzzle. And so for me, I learned all of these the hard way, or I was taught them by other people. And it's massively shaped my career, because I try and do these things. You can't do them all at the same time, obviously. But if you do these things, your probability for success in what you want to achieve will be true to who you are and what you want to establish and take home with you. I do have one last slide, and you can scan it if you want, but that's me on LinkedIn. I've only put my letter and my surname, but it actually is a LinkedIn QR code, but don't scan it if you don't want to. It's not going to blow up or anything. And so feel free to connect with me if you have any questions that you want to ask. I'm more than happy to answer them. I know I've gone quite quick, but there's quite a lot of content and different narratives and different stories at foot. How long have we got for questions?
So we've got like 10 minutes for questions.
Cool.
Okay, so first things first, testing this microphone works,
Nope.
which it doesn't. Hello, hello, hello.
Nope. As if we tested it beforehand.
Hello, hello, hello.
There we go. Perfect.
So does anybody have questions?
No.
No. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good.
This is a pity question.
I actually made a note. I think it was your rules 2 and 6 always have numbers.
Yeah.
Always have a plan. Perhaps a little bit more in the weeds, but around, I refer to it as the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Don't Panic book, or glasses, whatever you want to say they are. Do feeding into sort of plans, would you say that organisations or support organisations, or the actual organisation you are supporting, should have like playbooks and those sort of things with those numbers in, or it's not an individual number, it's a role that they can go to?
No question. So I can't remember who said it, but if you don't plan, you plan to fail, etc., etc. Same thing applies, right? And so one of the first things we do when we're onboarding a new organization and we want to work with them and we want to be able to foster that trust, let them have the responsibility, let them be able to dictate how they wish to operate with us. What are your critical assets? Who do we phone if something goes wrong? But principally, what are the key first steps in containment and understanding what challenges, are represented to you as a business? For example, if you're a finance broker or whatever, that system must stay up online. And so having a playbook around that to say, this is how we protect this asset and this is how we playbooked it against these threat actors and common methodors operandi, etc., is really, really key. Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any more? Questions?
Anyone can write an amazing CV.
Yep.
But what gets someone in front of you? What do you look out for?
That's a good question.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, of course. So the question was, everyone can write an amazing CV. What gets people in front of me and what stands out to me? Now, I'm probably the worst person to ask that question to because I'm quite sporadic, because I'm quite gut-led, right? And so I was giving a talk to a seminar of people who are going through a conversion program. It's quite a famous one that, people go through a 16-week training course, cybersecurity, all this sort of stuff. And I gave a talk and there was two people talking about, personal lives and all that sort of stuff. And I turned up. And that carried on for about 6 or 7 minutes. And I have no issue with that whatsoever. I'm there to, try and help, etc. And one person stood up and said, guys, should we get on with what we're here for? We can talk about this any other time. And that really stood out to me because it's putting yourself out there, it's putting your head above the parapet and exposing yourself. And I hired him because I thought I can work with that. And it wasn't just based on that, obviously. It turns out he's a triathlete and he's, very endurance led. And so I was thinking, right, okay, where does this tick some of the boxes? Yeah, right, yeah, cool. And so then we taught the skills. And so that inner instinct and way that he held himself and the first impressions matter and all of those sorts of things really, really made a difference to me. And so I've hired lots of people, I've hired people who are scaffolders and come work for us, people who fit home cinemas. We've had vets, we've had lots of ex-military. Ex-military are, traditionally speaking, expect adversity in different uncommon situations. And so those are the things that I look for in interviews. I care about your CV, but I don't think it defines you. Because my journey into cybersecurity, my first interview came from, my mum found a job application on Gumtree, and the person happened to have recognised my surname, wasn't related, didn't know who I was, but it got me an interview. Took the opportunity, and I worked with people who are sat in this room, took the right chances, said yes in the right situations, and so there's always a bit of luck involved, right? The last cybersecurity analyst position we had 800 applications in the first day. And so being a CV is not good enough, really. And that's really, really disheartening and hard to say. But coming to events like this, shaking hands, meeting people like me, because if I remember you and you ask that question and you apply and you go, there's something there. It's a little bit different. Any other questions?
We're talking about higher whatever level of performance, it's sort of high trust. How would you deal with someone that you after you are not where they are? What system do you deal with that?
This is where I get in trouble. So I move fast, and so I hire fast, I promote fastest, but I also get rid of people quite fast too. And so it's difficult in those regards, and there's always a commonality or a cause for it. I'm not looking for it. People either haven't, and it's not you get one chance and then it's done. But for me, if there's inherent positioning or the way that you choose to operate, or you're not looking out for the team, but to be honest, if you're looking out for yourself and you've done something, you've taken something off somebody else, those things are definitely not going to go in your benefit. And so your longevity in post often, is stunted based on that. But that's only with me. I don't think other organisations run that way. No problem.
We've got time for one more question. So, any takers? No, in that case, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.